karate is all about being gentle from a position of strength. Karate helped me in so much as it taught me the focus necessary to perform. It also taught me how to manage fear and how to manage aggression and how to manage adrenaline surge. I trained with Oyama Sensei himself. I stayed at his dojo. I slept in the dojo. I bled in his dojo. Sensei Tani created an environment where you could grow and you were encouraged to grow regardless of where you came from. And that was very, very, very exciting, because I eventually became deshi to Tani Sensei, and he treated me like a son. If you want to succeed in teaching karate, you've got to take into account modern training methodology.
For the last 25 years, he is coming twice a year to teach, to talk, to transfer information to us. But now I'll have the great chance to interview Sensei Paul Mitchell. He is a 9th Dan in karate, and he is Hanshi as well as in the Shido, but also in the Shugo system of Budo. So welcome. We call him Sensei, so welcome, Sensei Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
What we'll do is we'll ask you some questions, and I'm really, really happy to listen what you are going to say to us. But going back many, many years, so maybe you could tell us your first encounter with karate. So what drew you to training?
I'd always, even as a schoolboy, I'd enjoyed boxing. I enjoyed, then I experienced a little judo. And I always felt invigorated by the physicality of that whole thing. I enjoyed boxing very much. So when I discovered Kyokushin, and that was my first style of karate, when I discovered Kyokushin, it was like boxing with everything. You know, you were using your hands, your feet, your head. Everything was involved in this very, very physical thing. And I enjoyed Kyokushin. I didn't move from Kyokushin to Shukokai because Kyokushin was bad. I moved from Kyokushin to Shukokai because what I saw in, first of all, Sensei Tani, but he introduced us to a man called Kimura, Shigeru Kimura, Yoshio Nambu, and Mr. Iba. And they were the 3 people that traveled with him. And you didn't just see one person who was amazing. You saw 3 people who were complementary with one another, and movement that led me to think that I had to have that. It wasn't a question of should I, it was a question of how can I not? Because they were unique.
Going back to the first years, so did I get that right, that doing karate was mainly because of you had to defend yourself in the street, or based by the need of, I wouldn't say survive, but to defend themselves, rather than being very interested in the tradition? So the question that I wanted to ask is, was the training in these days different from the training as it is now, when you reflect your, first connections with karate in the first years?
Okay, I was very fortunate. I found karate at a time when Japan was transmitting a genuine product of their culture. And there's no doubt at all that karate is and was the most successful cultural export of Japan. But it was at a time where the cream of the crop were coming into the Western world to drive karate through into America and Australia and Britain and so on. And it wasn't just in Shukokai. Shotokan had people like Kanazawa and Enoida coming into the Western world. All of the major styles had the cream of the crop. And so we weren't seeing just any karate teacher, any martial arts teacher. We were seeing the very best. And that was exciting. There were exciting times.
You said you started in Kyokushin, and you mentioned already some people who influenced your start of the journey and the next steps in progressing in karate. But who were those people that you admired in these days? And did I get that right, that you even trained with founders of styles like Kyokushin? Yeah,
sure. I trained with Oyama Sensei himself. I stayed at his dojo. I slept in the dojo. I bled in his dojo. I suffered in his dojo. Training then was not as technically advanced as it is today. Today, if you want to succeed in teaching karate, you've got to take into account modern training methodology. So you're not just producing a fighter, but you're also teaching people how to eat. You're teaching people how to move, how to become stronger, and so on and so forth. In those days, it wasn't like that at all. You learned how to fight, and even kata. Sensei Tani was quite unique because, of course, he was a student of Mabuni. So his knowledge and understanding of kata was huge. But even the Japanese that we train with, they were young men. Kimura Sensei didn't know 50 kata. I'm not even sure that he knew 10. But that didn't diminish him as a karateka, because the 10 that he did know, he knew exceptionally well. I think one of the differences today is that, particularly with the way the internet is and so on, is that young people imagine that more is better. So they want to know stuff that they should really only start studying much later. So the depth of study is not quite as deep. I think that we are far better teachers than our predecessors, but there is a tendency to teach too much too soon, particularly when it comes to sport karate, where people want to learn stuff so that they can win a medal that is way, way, way beyond their capability of true understanding.
I think we will come to teaching methods as well. But just having a shortcut into sort of the chapter of philosophy and mindset. So karate itself is very often, and for a reason, seen for more than just physical training.
Sure.
So how would you describe, in general terms, its philosophy or...
Sensei Tani used to say that karate was zazen, moving meditation. But that takes time. We talk about things like no mushin, no mind. We talk about shuhari. And people use shuhari as an excuse to break away from their teacher and to, create their own style. But that's not what shuhari means at all. So a lot of these concepts are taught too soon. They're taught, generally speaking, quite badly. And so people don't understand that with every increase in freedom, there is a huge increase in responsibility. And it's very often the responsibility part that gets lost in the translation. Again, I was very fortunate, is that I had teachers who were extremely physical, like Kimura Sensei, like Nambu Sensei. But I also had Sensei Tani, who was an amazing man in many, many different aspects, but not least of which, he was the most senior student of Mabuni, the founder of Shitoryu. And he just a quick aside, he always used to say that the reason that I loved Shukokai is because Shukokai and I were born at the same time, March 1949. That makes me 39 now. But Shukokai and I were born at the same time. Now, that doesn't mean that he only started teaching then, but that was the time where Mabuni Sensei went to the dojo and said to him that you now inherit your system, and your system is Tani ha Shitoryu Shukokai. Okay.
If we stay with you personally for the moment, you just mentioned the teachers and a little bit how they were acting with you or with the students. What would you describe sort of life lessons in karate that you learned outside the dojo? So apart from the physical training, maybe of this person or of karate in general?
Let's just talk about karate in general to start off with. As a young man, I was in the military and I went to war. I was responsible at a time when most people are still playing up. As a 21-year-old, I was responsible for the lives of men in a theater of action. And that requires a sense of responsibility that is very onerous, particularly on young people, on young men. Karate helped me in so much as it taught me the focus necessary to perform in that theater. It also taught me how to manage fear and how to manage aggression and how to manage adrenaline surge. Each of my teachers taught me something a little different because they were all different people. Obviously, if I just jump back a little to Kyokushin, with Oyama Sensei, he was surrounded by Japanese instructors who really thought that you had to be Japanese to do good karate. They were wrong. There's no arguments about that. There is as much good karate outside of Japan today as there is inside of Japan. But they did have that feeling that, so they created a wall around Oyama Sensei. When I found Shukokai, what I found was that Sensei Tani actively pulled those walls down. So because as far as he was concerned, it didn't matter whether you were Australian or English or German or French, it didn't matter, or Japanese for that matter. If you were a karateka, you were a practicing karateka, then you were deserving of the same respect, regardless of your color or creed. And he was quite unusual in that regard. I could tell you stories about the way that he enforced that. But he eventually graded me to Shihan. I was the first Westerner to be graded to Shihan in any of the systems of Shitoryu. Now, since then, lots of people have been graded, but it took courage for him to be the very first one. And the one thing that Sensei Tani taught me was how to be courageous. Our dojo creed is effort, patience, temperance, respect, creativity, and courage. And he was asked at one stage, if courage is so important, why did courage come last? And he said, well, you need to be courageous to be respectful. And I think that we need to remember that. Karate is all about being gentle from a position of strength. It's not about, being the local bully or fighting your way. I was always a good fighter, always a good fighter. I grew up in Manchester post-war. I was my family was middle class. So therefore, we were the enemy, as so many saw us. So I would often have to fight my way home after school. I went to boarding school because my parents were overseas. My father was still in the Air Force. So I went to boarding school. Then from boarding school, I went into the army. I didn't know anything other than that type of institutionalized training environment. What I found at Shukokai was an environment where I could train hard. I could develop those skills of courage and all of the rest of it, but in an environment that was... Sensei Tani created an environment where you could grow and you were encouraged to grow regardless of where you came from. And that was very, very, very exciting, because I eventually became deshi to Tani Sensei, and he treated me like a son.
Thank you for giving us inside views into development and into your starting period of karate, as well as a deshi, which means student. But you not only have been training for such a long time, you also been teaching for such a long time.
Sure.
So just a side question, how do you personally balance the discipline and the compassion whilst teaching?
It's a very interesting question. You can choose to be an instructor or a sensei. Sensei means one who has gone before. Doesn't mean teacher per se. So what you should do as a sensei is you must walk the path and guide others to follow you. So people follow you willingly. If you're an instructor, you're like the sheepdog at the back. You're barking and you're driving people in a direction. I think that it's okay. I think people will learn in both environments. But if you want to develop students who have been with you for 30 or 40 years, and I'm very fortunate that I've got students who have been with me that length of time, it's because I learned the lesson of how a sensei should actually behave. And I learned it in the only way that's truly possible, and that is by example. So Sensei Tani walked the path, and I followed. And it was an experience that was actually good for both of us. As a sensei, you learn as much from your students as your students learn from you. The way that you teach, the way that you communicate, the way that you transmit knowledge, their feedback, as long as you're receptive, as long as you are receptive to their energy, they will tell you whether you're doing a good job or not. You don't need somebody else to say you're doing a good job. Sensei Tani graded me to Shihan, not because of any reason other than that he believed that I could represent something that he loved, something that he believed in. A lot of Westerners, not just Westerners, a lot of Westerners think that when you get to fifth dan, you just automatically Shihan. They just don't understand that it's actually three. And there was a piece in Facebook just last week that I actually responded to, where somebody was talking about Shido and Shugo grades, and they had it all totally mixed up because Westerners hear these titles and they're used to hearing about people being a seventh dan or an eighth dan. So that's not of interest anymore. So they want to be Kiyoshi or they want to be Hanshi, and they think that this is just something that you automatically get. So if you promote yourself to seventh dan, you're automatically Hanshi. It doesn't work like that at all. You are judged by your teacher. You're judged by your peers. And when you're ready, you are awarded a rank in either Shido, which is leadership, or Shugo, which is personal development. But it only starts at Sandan, third dan. Because you're only considered to be no longer a beginner, at third Dan. Now you may say, oh, goodness me, you know, that's 20 years of training, surely to goodness. But the Japanese didn't take you seriously. I'm talking about in those days. They didn't take you seriously until you've been training with them for 20 years. When you've been training with them 20 years, they realized that you were there for the long haul. So they started to treat you differently. And I said to you before that I eventually became Deshi. Deshi doesn't just mean student, it means disciple. And Sensei Tani only issued 11 Shihan certificates in his life. He issued even less Menkyu Kaiden. And it's not something of which I am boastfully proud. It's something that I'm proud of because it showed his trust in me.
It's very interesting to see how we define through our journey the prescription of beginners, because if you begin karate, that's your first stage of development from being a white belt until you consider yourself an advanced student in terms of maybe the aim of becoming a black belt once.
Sure.
But what would you see maybe in that period of karate, what would be the biggest mistakes that beginners in those terms would do?
I think the problem is not with those students. I think the problem is that the instructors are instructors, they're not senseis. And they don't really understand how it works. So if the teacher doesn't understand, then how can the student? I think that, look, karate is a martial art. It's not a system of ballet or, and by the way, I've got the greatest respect for ballet dancers and the training that they do, but karate is not ballet. Karate is a martial art. It's derived from a martial art. It's got to be martial. But at the same time, Sensei Ronan always used to say that the only advantage of being a black belt is that you actually get to wear one. Everything else is responsibility. But again, you know, through the promotion of things like the original Karate Kid and so on and so forth, people imagine that black belt is the end of the journey. What we need to remember that Shodan means first step. So at that point, you've only taken the first step. And the development of karate is like in a circle. So you start at the top of the circle as a white belt. You then progress through the color belt, and then right at the very bottom, the lowest point is Shodan. And the black belt signifies a confusion. You take all of those colors and you mix them together and you get black, because there's actually no such color as black in the natural world. You create black by using other colors in combination. And then you climb out and you come up the other side. First Dan, second Dan, third Dan, fourth Dan, fifth Dan, sixth Dan, seventh Dan, eighth Dan. At ninth Dan, you become a red belt again, the same as you were as a ninth Q. So the grade starts white belt, then red belt, then yellow belt, and so on. You get back to ninth Dan, and you wear a red belt again, just twice as wide. What this is doing is it's signifying a return to what we call a beginner's mind. In other words, the acceptance that even though you've been doing karate for 50 years or whatever it is, you have now reached a stage where you're able to truly understand where it is that you are. And I'm very fortunate. I've never had to grade myself. I've always had someone very special in a position to do that. And I'm talking about someone special in terms of direct lineage to Mabuni and Tani, then people like Yamada Sensei, Kawata Sensei. Kawata Sensei, who was Sensei's most senior student, was the person who graded me not only to ninth Dan, but graded me also to Hanshi. And there is only one Hanshi in a style. You can't have 10 Hanshis in the style. It doesn't matter how many high grades you've got, there's only one Hanshi. And Kawata Sensei chose to make a Westerner his hanshi for his styles of Seikukai. So I've been very, very fortunate that I've learned from the very, very best. And I don't put myself in the same category as those people, but I can share experiences with my students that most people can't share because they didn't actually experience it.
I think that's so interesting to see that this book, let's compare this with a book that you're starting to read, is getting more interesting, even new chapters and capitals.
Sure.
I remember you saying that karate is like climbing up a rock, a mountain.
Yeah.
You always come a stage higher, but then you also and as well see what there's still to learn.
Sure.
And you've got other views to things. Or in other terms, people go to school and they want to finish school, and then they go to university, but then the professors say, now we're doing mathematics. Everything up to now was just calculating.
Sure.
So there's already a new perspective of things. Coming back to you as a teacher, if you have students of different age groups, different abilities, how do you adapt training or teaching in those terms for these different types of people that you deal with?
Okay, let me just say at this point in time that karate is not a sport. It was never a sport. It was adapted as a sporting format, and it produces amazing athletes, but it's not a sport. But we are fortunate that we have different aspects of karate that you can adapt for different people. So, for instance, with children, you teach them a sporting format because it teaches them the discipline, it teaches them the respect, it teaches them the self-respect, which is super, super critical in terms of the development of people. And you can use that as a vehicle for development. But you've got to get to a point where you start to teach people the martial arts. And at what stage do you start doing that? And this is where experience comes in. I personally don't believe that you should ever teach children and adults in the same class. Okay, I don't care how big or small your dojo is, because children learn differently than adults and vice versa. The reason that adults train is very different from children. And very often, the parents will bring the children to the dojo to get the discipline that they're not getting in other parts of their life. So there are different reasons for people training. And as a good sensei, you should adapt and adopt your path to suit those individuals. But with karate, we've got enough scope that we can do that.
We started this chapter with your personal own beginning years and development. And you mentioned before that you are 39, with all respect, but you are a bit older than 39, being a living legend. But with getting older, with all respect, you need to change your training. How would you describe your training at this moment of time or at this stage of your life, yourself, your own training?
Yeah, look, I still enjoy the rough and tumble of kumite and particularly bunkai. I really enjoy it. And with all due respect, I'm reasonably good at it. But in recent times, I've had both my knees replaced. I've had one hip replaced. I'm just about to have another hip replaced. So I'm not at the moment moving as quickly as I would like. But what that's done, and thanks to Sensei Tani, really, the lessons that he taught me, I've been able to supplement my thought process and my enthusiasm by now, if I can't train, I've been writing a book. And it's actually the same discipline. It's exactly the same thing. You're using a strategic approach to doing something that you probably wouldn't do if you hadn't done karate. I've been doing karate now for 56 years. And it's as interesting today as it was 56 years ago. Now, you may say, well, hang on, how's that possible? You get to a point where surely you've learnt everything that there is to know about a subject if you've been doing it for 56 years, or maybe you've been sleeping for part of that time. Karate isn't like that at all, particularly Shukokai. Let me not talk about other styles. Let me talk about Shukokai and what Shukokai is, rather than what other styles are not. Shukokai challenges you daily, both from a technical perspective and from a physical perspective. Sensei Tani died at 79. At 78 3/4, he was still doing demonstrations. Were the demonstrations as fast and as hard as they were when I first saw him when he was only 50? No, of course not. Let's be sensible about that. But were they delivered with the same passion? Absolutely they were. And my passion for karate today is greater than it was then. And let me tell you, it was bloody great then. So you've got to understand that karate is not just physical training. You alluded a little earlier about the mental side of training and the mental development. The mental development comes not as a result of some artificially put together program. It develops because you are constantly challenged. And because you're constantly challenged, you've got to think constantly about how it is you're going to adapt and adopt your karate to that challenge. And one of my challenges at the moment is, how do I do karate when I've just lost one hip and just about to lose another one? The reality is that I've got the enthusiasm that was created by my teachers, and I'm able to continue with that enthusiasm even though I don't move physically in the way. But I'm really looking forward to, hitting you again soon.
Yeah, and you're practicing, and there's this saying that you are either a practicing karateka
or you're not. Well, that was Sensei Kimura. Sensei Kimura, because people would say, well, Sensei, I'm a fifth dan, or I'm a fourth dan. And Sensei said, are you training? And they'd say, well, not at the moment, because of. And Sensei would say, well, you are only a karateka as long as you are practicing karate. But I think that where people make a mistake is that they think that practicing karate is only the physical side of it. I mean, I traveled from Bangkok 2 days ago, and last night I taught, and I was going to have a short session, and I did. It was 2.5 hours, and that 2.5 hours went like a moment, and it goes like a moment because of the enthusiasm and the energy that's developed by a group of people who are training together. And so it's those sorts of things that sustain the interest and the excitement.
We have talked about the tradition of karate. So it has very deep traditions.
Yes.
But it's also very evolving. So what changes do you embrace, and what do you think should not be lost in terms of karate?
How many hours are we going to be talking now? Another 9. Okay, let's be sensible about that question. I'm going to sound like my father now. As you get older, time goes quicker. There's no doubt about that, it does. But compared with my father, my world is changing even faster. The time of change started in really 1939 when the war started. And one doesn't like to talk about war, but we have to understand that technology is often driven by things like wars. And the technology development that was as a result of the Second World War accelerated us into this spiral of change. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about corporate change or personal change, the speed of change is accelerating. It's not getting any less. And we talk about AI. There's now the possibility of doing all sorts of things with AI far quicker than you can do it manually. Okay. Karate will change as the world around it changes. But I believe that karate, and certainly Shukokai, is very resilient. We do embrace change. We accept that change is going to occur whether we embrace it or not. So by embracing it, it helps us maintain a momentum. And our dojos are successful because, in many instances, because we embrace that change.
Speaking of development, karate is a traditional martial art, as you mentioned before. But what role do you think do modern training methods, like in sports science, etc., play in still teaching traditional martial arts?
Okay, I'm a great fan of modern training methodology. Sensei Chris Thompson, and I mean, some of you know him, some of you don't. Great karateka, and certainly in the 70s and the 80s, he was physically one of the best karateka. He used to say that Shukokai is for thinking traditionalists. And I think that's a really good description of Shukokai. You have to think because you're challenged all the time. Sensei Tani set up a system which encourages change. It doesn't just embrace it, it encourages it. And for most of us who have trained, genuinely trained in this system, we're comfortable with change because change has been a fact of our life, since Sensei Tani founded Shukokai. What you find now is you find a lot of people claiming to do Shukokai. They may not have trained with Kimura, they may not have trained with Tani, they may not have trained with anybody of note, but the name is famous, and so therefore they embrace that name for their own purposes. Do I feel challenged by that? No, not at all, because I think that most thinking people can discern where you're getting a product that is of value. Okay, and we have dojos with 500-600 people in them, and that's not 500 or 600 people. That's 500 or 600 families. And so if you extrapolate that, you're talking about dojos servicing maybe 2,000 people, and those 2,000 people are discerning.
If you have a short sidestep into sports karate versus traditional training methods, there was a time when karate went to the Olympics, certainly when the Olympics took place in Japan. How did you feel and how do you feel about this?
I was fortunate that before I was 40, I was Australian national kata coach. I was Australia's chief referee. I was Australia's representative on the World Technical Council. I was an associate member of the World Referee, the Asian Pacific. I was on the Asian Pacific Referees Council. I was very, very involved in sport karate. Okay, and sport karate teaches you. I'm talking about if you embrace it properly. It teaches you a lot of scientific methodology to develop athletes. Now, that cross-feeds into traditional karate. It doesn't stop that development. And there is cross-fertilization in the other way as well. The the issue for me with sport karate is not that sport karate exists. It's that so many people are lost to karate because they feel that when they get to the point where they can no longer win a medal, that karate is no longer for them. But in actual fact, that should be the start. That should be the beginning. So if in your dojo you have a sport karate element to it, what you need to do is to keep it separate. So you're teaching people a traditional format of karate. If they're suitable, they're encouraged and invited to come and do the sporting aspect, but you insist that they participate in both, so that when they get to a point where they're no longer winning medals, they still feel that there is something in karate for them.
That also could be a reason to have people committed through the years. And besides karate, everyone goes through ups and downs in his life,
Sure.
Successes and failures. But leaving sport karate aside for the moment, how would you describe, or how would you have people still training for so many years? How do you inspire people and having them committed to karate?
You're asking me for my secret now, my secret sauce, like Papa Duck and Kung Fu Panda. There is no such thing as the secret sauce. What there is an understanding of what sensei is. How do I inspire you to keep training? By keeping on training, by continuing to walk the path. If I just take a little sidestep here to respect, particularly in the Western world, the managing director expects that people will respect him and his position. He's hoping it's respecting him, but he'll cope with just respecting his position. And even in the military, they talk about when you salute an officer, you're not saluting the man, you're saluting the uniform. I actually don't subscribe to that at all. And why don't I subscribe to that? Because Sensei Tani didn't subscribe to that. Respect is like a ball. And if a ball is lying on the table, the only way to make it move is to push down from the top and move your hand. You can't even get to the bottom to push it. Now, you may say, well, okay, I can flick it, but that's not how a ball moves. So if you put pressure down, what happens is the ball turns. And now what was the bottom now becomes to the top. And Sensei Tani used to say, respect only ever moves down. And respect should only ever move down. That's why earlier I said that you need courage to be respectful. For a teacher who has got 1,000 students, to initiate that cycle of respect, the teacher has to first of all respect the student. So you have someone walk through your door, a mum come in with the kids, or whatever the case may be. You have got to initiate the first part of that respect. And if you're genuine and you respect them, they in turn will respect you. Okay. There are lots of times, and you talked about people go through hard times and easy times, and people go through divorce, people go through bankruptcies, but people also go through many good times. If you are setting, as a sensei, you are setting an example of how your life journey can be made better through strategically using karate. That inspires other people to follow you. Will everybody follow? No, goodness me. I have taught tens of thousands of people over the years. How many students have I got who have been with me for 20 years plus? 20, 30? But I'm fortunate. Many organizations haven't got anywhere near that. In fact, I've probably got more than 20 or 30. But the reality is that if everybody is working on the understanding that respect travels down, then what happens is that it makes it easy. So if I respect you, it makes it easier for you to respect me. Okay.
You just mentioned the people that stay for you for a long time.
Yes.
Who now train on a senior level.
Yes.
Let's focus just for the moment on those senior levels.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most rewarding part of teaching students at this particular senior level?
I can't describe it, not in a few words. When I arrived yesterday and I got onto the floor, I had undertaken to myself, forget about anybody else, I'd undertaken to myself that I would just do a 1-hour session just so that I preserved my hip for the balance of the week. And 2.5 hours later, I was still teaching. It was exciting. So the enthusiasm of the group, I'm getting excited now just thinking about it. The enthusiasm of the group is so dynamic. I'm talking about people who are genuinely training. Now, Sensei Kimura used to get really, really peeved with people who were senior, but were no longer training properly. He used to get frustrated. When he was younger, he used to get very frustrated. But it is frustrating when you see the promise, you see the potential in a person, and then they walk away from it for what actually are fairly non-important reasons. Now you may say, well, hang on, a divorce or a bankruptcy or a blah, 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 that's not, of course it's of consequence. But if you continue to train and you continue to feed off the energy of that group, you're able to get through it far, far more sensibly, with far more prospects of success. And I think that the thing about a senior group like that is not whether I enjoy teaching it, it's whether we enjoy training together. It's not about me teaching you. We explore karate together.
It's amazing. I'm sitting a couple of meters away from you, and I feel that enthusiasm. I see the glancing in your eyes, and I think I can feel goosebumps just listening to you. And this next question may sound quite philosophic, but just let's put it in simple terms. You are a living and true legend, master of karate. But what is your hope that your legacy will be as a master of karate?
Look, I don't think I'm a master of karate. What I am is a long-term student of karate. I believe that Shukokai deserves a continuance of the legacy. As I said, I was fortunate to train with Tani and people like Kimura and Nambu and so on when they were much younger than they obviously grew as they. I mean, Sensei Kimura was not with us as long as we would have hoped him to be, but we can't change that. But I was fortunate to be there at a time where all of us were very much younger, and all of us were doing karate, which was sometimes a little bit hit and miss, nowhere near as scientific as it is now, but oh my God, we loved it. And when I was promoted to Shihan and I was on the floor with people like Yamada and Kawata and Kimura, I was training in the same class, and there was Sensei Tani teaching us double hip and bending the front knee and this and kick shock and all of these things that we think were developed by various people. In actual fact, were extensions of what Sensei Tani was teaching. And the energy in that room was just amazing. Now, what is really exciting for me, and we talk about the future, is that the energy last night in my Shihan class was as exciting and as dynamic as it was in those days. Does that mean that, you know, you're like Yamada and you're like Kawata? No, you're different. You're very, very different. But you've been training as long and as hard as they did, and in an environment where there's far more understanding of correct training methodology. So in many ways, technically, you're better. But while I'm in that subject there of the dynamics of a group like that, doesn't matter whether it's my group like that or whether it's Sensei Tani's group like that, there's got to be a determination that ego is not going to be the driver for that sort of senior training. You know, anybody who's seen Karate Kid will know what a bad dojo looks like compared with a good dojo. And that's all very simplistic. But in actual fact, it's actually quite accurate. I remember Sensei Kimura and I went to Japan together, which we did fairly frequently. And we were on the floor training, and there was me as a young Shihan, and there's all these legends. You talk about legends. I mean, you know, when you start talking about Yamada and Kawata and Kimura and so on, you're talking about real legends. Okay. But Sensei Kimura was training away there, and he was about 3 places down from me. And Sensei Tani looked at him, and he said to Sensei Kimura, he said, "What have you been doing with your Neko Ashidachi?" And Sensei Kimura said, "Oh, training, Sensei." and Sensei Tani said to Yamada Sensei, "Yamada, take Kimura over there and go and work on his Neko Ashidachi." And I'm thinking, oh my God, because I mean, Kimura was considered by thousands of people to be a god in karate. Sensei Kimura just bowed to Sensei Tani, stepped off to the side of the dojo, and so there we were training, and there's Sensei Kimura on the side of the dojo with Yamada Sensei correcting his Neko Ashidachi. The following morning, we arrived at the dojo, and Kimura Sensei was wearing a white belt. And everybody went, oh my God. And I said to Sensei Kimura, why are you wearing a white belt? And he said, because I came into the dojo of my teacher with my cup full, and it should have been empty. And he had to teach me that my cup needed to be adjusted. And he did. And I need to adopt a beginner's mind. When people talk about a beginner's mind, they've got no idea what that means. Okay. Kimura knew exactly what it meant. But he adopted a symbolism to show everybody else that he understood what had happened the previous day. Now, okay, so what was the impact of that? Well, let me tell you what the impact was on me. I learned in the simplest way possible what true respect actually is. Because here was a master, a legend, a real living legend, who just accepted the instruction of his teacher.
Also some great life lessons that someone can learn. If we go back through the years with you being a younger karate student, and if you could turn back the time, but still give from your perspective now, the young student, Paul Mitchell, an advice, what would it be?
Train harder. Every style of karate has its strengths and its weaknesses. It doesn't matter which style it is. The Shotokan man will say, well, Shotokan's the best, and the Goju man will say the Goju style, and Kyokushin always say the Kyokushin is the best. But in actual fact, it's nonsense. Karate of any style is only as good as the man who is practicing it, or the woman, in the case of many of our dojos. If a man or a woman is training hard in Shukokai, or in any style for that matter, they will learn a lot of lessons that are important. But one of the most important lessons that we learn as we train, so you asked me what would be my advice to a young Paul Mitchell, train harder. Because the harder you train, the more you expose your weaknesses. The more you expose your weaknesses, the more you learn about your weaknesses. And if you've got a good sensei, by exposing your strengths and your weaknesses, it gives your sensei the opportunity to help you develop the yin and the yang that has to exist in karate. I mean, I remember, and it's a long time ago now, 40 years ago, I suppose, my Tokyu kata, my preferred kata is Sempai. And when I went to Japan, I used to do a lot of demonstrations with Sensei Tani. So he would do a demonstration and I would do it. And my demonstration usually was the bunkai of Sempai. And I loved it. Oh, I love that kata. It's even now, I love working on it. And I learn something every time I do work on it, because it really does. It's a kata that stimulates me. It obviously just suits me. Anyway, I was working on Sempai, and Sensei was sat there, and he used to bring a chair down into the dojo, and he would just sit there, and he would instruct me from his chair. Every now and then he'd get up and kick me into shape, but mostly he'd just sit there and tell me what he wanted me to do. Anyway, we'd been training, I suppose, about an hour and a half, and he said to me, okay, we're going for lunch. And I said to him, but Sensei, it's only breakfast time. He said, okay, we'll go for a late breakfast then. And off we went to the restaurant, cafe, just around the corner from the dojo. Really good coffee shop, really good tosto, coffee and toast. Loved it. Anyway, so we were sat there, and he said to me, he said, your strong is very, very good. He said, but your soft needs a lot of work. Now, in life, not just karate, in life, you need balance. You need the balance, the yin and the yang that is in all of us. And what he was saying to me was that it doesn't matter how good my karate looked, it didn't matter how good my kumite was, that there was a lack of balance in what it was that I was doing. So I was expecting him to give me a whole heap of drills to go away and do, and so maybe go and do some work on Suprempe or Sempai or one of the kata that develop internal strength. And he said, no, he said, I want you to write heiku. And I knew what heiku was, but I thought that I knew what heiku was. What I didn't understand at that moment in time is why Sensei wanted me to write heiku. And he explained to me that all of the warriors of Japan practiced some art form other than just using their sword. And certainly as during the shogunate, the period where the jutsu forms became the do forms, the samurai adopted and adapted a lot of the classical art forms, whether it be writing heiku or whether it be bonsai,
mask carving.
Mask carving. Well, we can talk about mask carving in a moment. But you would develop these sporting things, these art forms, because it balanced the individual. So anyway, so he started teaching me how to write haiku. And to begin with, it was very frustrating because haiku's very disciplined. It's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. And you know, people talk now about modern haiku where free-form haiku. It's nonsense. Haiku talks about the balance of and the discipline of the 5-7-5 formula in terms of syllables. But this was about 5 or 6 years before Sensei died. I think that he was about, let's say, 70 when he asked me to start writing haiku. And for the last 9 years of his life, when I went to Japan, I would take some of the examples of haiku that I'd written, and he would coach me in writing this art form. And it did help me understand where that imbalance was with my hard and my soft. So it worked, I'm pleased to say. Sorry, it's working, I'm pleased to say. But what it did is it taught me some very important lessons about the ego, the false ego that people have as a result of physical strength. Sensei always used to talk about being gentle from a position of strength. So he did approve, as did Kimura, of course, he did approve of being strong. But he used to say to us all the time that this gave us the opportunity to choose to be gentle. Okay. And I think there's a very big difference between choosing to be gentle and being gentle because you have no option. Okay. I remember one time turning up for training, and remember, I traveled halfway around the world to come and train with him. I arrived, and I used to get to the bottom of the stairs, and I would shout, "Sensei!" and up the stairs, and he'd come to the top of the stairs, and he'd come running down, and he always did the same thing. He'd punch me, and then we'd go into the dojo. Because I loved that man. He was just such a superstar in so many different ways. Anyway, this time, Mrs. Tani came to the top and says, "Oh, Sensei's in the mask carving room." Now, I got to tell you, the mask carving room, the stairs that go up to the apartment above the dojo, underneath there was a space that Sensei had converted to being his mask carving room. And Sensei was quite famous for the carving of his masks. And he used to carve the way masks are made for the theater there is they carve a beautiful wooden template. And then they lay, it used to be clay, but then later on fiberglass and so on. But they would use that template then to make masks. And Sensei was quite famous for the carving of these masks. Anyway, so I opened the door, and there's Sensei sat in his mask carving room, his mask carving space. And he's carving this beautiful, great big wooden mask. Anyway, so I came and he told me to come and sit down. So I sat down, and he started to talk to me about ibuki. Now, ibuki is a coordination of breathing and movement. And he started to explain to me the importance of understanding how the two supported one another and related. And if you watch your novices training, you'll see they'll do a whole kata without breathing. Okay. As people become more senior, the breathing becomes a very important integral part of movement in itself. So he started to explain to me that even mask carving, if you wanted a stroke, a carving of the mask, you had to breathe with it. So anyway, so he takes this mask, which must have been worth a fortune because it was almost finished, and he put this mask in my lap, and he gave me the chisel, right? And he said, "I want you to carve a line from there to there." And he took a pencil and he just made a very faint line. He said, "It's got to go from there to there." this was more terrifying for me than any kumite, because I've got this thing worth a lot of money, and he now wants me to carve it, right? So anyway, he started to work on my breathing, and he got me to breathe and make the movement, breathe and make the movement. And then when I was ready, it was, and there it was. Now, I'd like to tell you that the carved line was perfect. Of course it wasn't. But it did teach me that if you get the breathing right, you can actually mostly get the movement right. And I spent a week with Sensei, literally the week that I went for training, I spent in his mask carving room. Every day I went and sat in his mask carving room, and we talked about breathing and movement. And I learned more about breathing and movement, about taisabaki, ashisabaki, and the importance of breathing and moving. I learned more in that week watching him carve a mask than I'd learned in 20 years in the dojo.
Thanks for sharing those experiences and personal experiences with Sensei Tani. I think we will follow up this talk, and maybe you can give some more inside views about episodes and experiences that you made. Let's have a look at the whole, and let's just call it for the moment, career in karate with yourself. Would there be any specific moment that stands out or would be especially meaningful for you?
There are personal moments where, for me, were very special. But there was a period of my life where I was very stressed. It doesn't matter why it was. It had nothing to do with relationships or anything like that. It was just a period that was very difficult for me. And my then wife, Denise, and she's an amazing woman, she said to me, for goodness sake, why don't you go and train with Sensei? Because she knew that it didn't matter what happened, that Sensei Tani understood me. We had a relationship. It was like a father-son relationship. I loved him as much as any member of my family. And I think that it was mostly reciprocated. So I went off to see Sensei Tani, and I arrived, let's say I arrived on the Friday. I can't remember whether I arrived on the Friday or the Thursday. It doesn't really matter. And we were training, and I explained to Sensei why I was there and that I was feeling stressed and all the rest of it. And it's fine. So we trained, and we trained on the Friday, and we trained on the Saturday. On the Sunday morning, when I got to the dojo, he said, we're going to Kyoto. And I said to him, oh, okay. So I'm thinking now, okay, we're going to go sightseeing. So off we go. We get on the train and we go off to Kyoto. And we go to we go to a Zen Buddhist monastery in Kyoto. And it's a monastery that's got beautiful stone gardens, and we might at some stage have a talk about the significance of stone gardens and Japanese culture, but an amazing place for meditation. And I've been there before, and I knew that the abbot, in other words, the chief monk, I knew that the abbot was a close personal friend of Sensei Tani. So I gathered that Sensei just wanted to talk to his friend, and he was taking me along for the ride. So anyway, he said to me, go and have a look at the gardens. So I went and sat down and just got into a meditative state. And this one particular garden, it's got this stone, and it looks like a turtle. And the whole story was about this turtle that swims all the way around the world. And they've created this whole journey in the stone garden. It really is amazing. So anyway, I'm sat there. And after about an hour, this young monk comes, and this young monk he was actually from Sweden. He wasn't Japanese at all. And he said, "Oh, Sensei wants to see you." So anyway, so I thought, okay, we're going to leave now. So I got up and I went, and Sensei said to me, okay, he said, "I'm going back to Kobe now and you're going to stay here." I said, "Oh." He said, "Yep, you're going to stay here." I said, "Well, how long am I going to?" He said, "For as long as is necessary." So he left, and he left me there, and the abbot allocated me a room and introduced me to some of the young monks, particularly the ones that could speak English and so on. And the monks have got a process. They get up in the morning, they meditate and pray, and then they have breakfast, and then they go and work in the monastery or in the fields or whatever is their task. And for me, my task for the day was to go and do karate in some part of the monastery, and I did that every day for 4 or 5 weeks. And then, I mean, obviously, Sensei was communicating with the abbot, and when they felt that I'd recovered, Sensei came and we went back to Kobe, and I trained for a few more days, and then I went home. Why was that memorable? Well, most people don't get the opportunity to live for any period of time in a Zen Buddhist monastery. But that wasn't what was important about it. It was that Sensei cared enough to make sure that I got training that was appropriate for my state and condition at that moment in time. Now, so I ask you, you've got students, you've got 1,000 students or more, and each of them is an individual. Now, you can't possibly know each student as intimately as Sensei Tani knew me. Okay. He knew my family, he knew my kids, he knew my wife, he knew as much about me as any person on this earth. He cared enough to find a solution that was appropriate. How often do we do the same? And the reality is probably not often enough. Now, with my senior students, people like you, people like Martin, people like Pat, people like Tom, I know you well enough that very often the training is for you. It may be for the group, and the groups that we train in at that level are not very big groups anyway. But sometimes the training is for you. Sometimes the training is for Stefan. Sometimes the training is for Martin. Sometimes the training is for the group. Okay. But I don't just arrive and teach. I think very carefully about what I'm going to teach and to whom I'm going to teach it. And Sensei Tani taught me that. He taught me that it doesn't matter the size of the group, the individual is really important if you are going to be sensei. Now, if what you're going to be is a sheepdog, you can drive an awful lot of sheep. But if you want to be the shepherd, you've got to walk and the people follow. And I think that is really important, that as we progress in karate, as we train, as we develop as human beings, we've got to remember that not every human being develops at the same pace. So some people can get to black belt in 5 years, other people will take 10 years, some people will take 10 years to get to second dan, some people will never get to second dan. And not everybody can be a fifth dan, and not everybody can be a sixth dan. You are who you are, and karate can be structured for you. But you have to have a sensei that is sensitive to the needs of the people who are following him or her. And some of our best instructors are females. Some of our best, and how can this little lady be sensei to a 6'3" man? Well, actually quite easily, because sensei is about strategic. Sensei Tani was tiny. If you look, I'm not a big man. I'm not tiny either, but I'm not a big man. But if you have a look at photographs of me with Sensei Tani, he looks tiny compared with me. Okay. But he was huge on the inside. Sensei Kimura was big and strong. And he was huge on the inside. I don't know how much longer we've got to talk, but I just want to share one story about Sensei Kimura. I was a fourth Dan at the time, and I had just been promoted and ranked as an international kata judge for the World Karate Federation. Well, it used to be WUKO at that time. And I was on the Asian Pacific Referees Council. And at that time, the kata that everybody wanted to do was Nipapo. But I didn't know Nipapo. So I was going to America to train with Sensei Kimura. And I said to him, Sensei, I don't want to be rude, but could you please teach me Nipapo? And he just laughed. And I said, why are you laughing at me? He said, I don't know Nipapo. He said, I'm not even sure that I ever did. Now, a lot of Japanese instructors would have just made up. He'd have gone and got a book, he would have made up, and he would have said that this is a special secret family version of Nipapo. That was not Kimura Sensei. Kimura Sensei, with his karate, was always dead set honest. Okay, his karate was very honest. There was no nonsense with Kimura's karate. So he just laughed at me. He said, but I'll arrange it. So I thought that he would find somebody in America that knew it and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, after he said, train. He said, I'll make a few phone calls. So anyway, I continued training in the dojo, and Sensei Kimura went off into his office. And after about 15, 20 minutes, he came out and said, where's your ticket? And I said, what ticket, Sensei? He said, your plane ticket. I saw it's in my bag. So he said, get it for me. So anyway, I got my ticket and I gave it to him. And with Kimura Sensei, you didn't ask too many questions. You know, Sensei, that was enough. Sensei. So I gave him my ticket. About half an hour later, he came back. He said, okay. He said, I've arranged it. You're going to Japan. He said, and Sensei Tani is going to teach you Nipapo. I said, oh, when? He said, tomorrow. And he paid himself for me to fly back to Australia via Japan so that Sensei Tani could teach me Nipapo. That's why I get excited about Shukokai. Because someone like Kimura cared enough. He knew that it was important to me. He didn't care about WKF or any other KF. But he knew it was important to me, and he knew that as his student, I needed to fulfill this task. So he made sure that he put it there so that I could. And I appreciated that. He's been dead now for 30 years. I appreciate that gesture as much today as I did then.
Thanks again for sharing that with us. If we were to put some light on the other side of the medal, as we say, what would you say in general terms would be someone's misconception about karate, or things that people like to let go of?
The biggest misconception with karate, everything today in the modern world is packaged. Okay, you can do a short course in Japanese, or a short course in this, or a short course in that, and everybody wants short-term results. Karate is not about short-term results. Karate is about resilience. Karate is about strength of character. Karate is about courage. Karate is about respect. And it takes a long time to take the steps. To get to first dan, 4 or 5 years. To get to second dan, another 3 or 4 years. To get to third dan, another 4 or 5 years. You're already into half a lifetime for some people. And you're only getting to the point where karate recognizes that you're ready now to start grading in Shido and Shugo. And they're not things that you award yourself. They are things that other people award you. I was asked just yesterday by one of my shihans, what did I consider when I'm considering someone for shihan? And the answer is really, in some ways, very simple, and in other ways, very complex. In terms of human development, it's like climbing a mountain. And when you're climbing a mountain, I don't know if you've ever done any rock climbing, but if you're climbing a mountain, your nose is 5 centimeters away from the rock face, and you're climbing. So you can see a meter, but that's it. But your climbing instructor, who's on the top of the hill, can see the whole climb. So he can see that you should move left or you should move right. And if he or she is a good climbing instructor, they will guide you through the difficult parts of the climb. Now, some of the parts, they will let you struggle. Some of the parts, they'll just let you struggle. But there will be other parts that they will make easier for you. But they can see your whole climb from that perspective. Now, karate is just like climbing a rock face. It's human development. You are climbing and you've got no idea where, you know what the destination, you know the destination you're hoping it's going to be, but you can't see it yet because you're climbing. But your teacher can see it. So your teacher says, you're ready for third dan. The correct answer is sensei, and just do the work that is necessary to fulfill their trust in you. You can't go to them and say, Sensei, I'm ready for third dan. Because my answer to you is, how do you know? When are you ready for shihan? I can tell you, but you can't tell me. How can you possibly know? This isn't a mystery. This is human development. If you think about all of the things that you've learned in your life, most of them that you've learned, you are not really sure of what the destination is going to produce. You know that it's desirable, but you ask someone else to guide you, whether it be your university lecturer, whether it be your teacher at school, whether it be your mother or your father, where they're sharing their life experiences with you. But at every stage in your life, you need a guide because life is complicated. Now, so this is why you can be sensei to some, senpai to some, and kohei to others. In the same person, the same time, you can be all three. I'll share one more story with you just before we finish. And I think it's a story that's important, certainly important from my perspective. Sensei Tani ran a very traditional dojo. And when I say traditional, I'm talking about in terms of the structure. So each of us, as we were developing, we had a senpai. Now, a senpai is not a rank of teacher. A senpai is a senior person who is given the responsibility of helping develop an individual. So my senpai was Omi Sensei. He was a fourth dan. I was a first dan. I was a second Dan. I was a third Dan. He was still a fourth Dan. And then I lost contact with him. He stopped training, and I was very sad, but I cared deeply for him, and he cared for me. Anyway, so let's fast forward now 20 years. And I arrive in Japan, and my favorite form of travel is I would fly into Tokyo, and then I would catch the Shinkansen down to Kobe. I'd get off at Shin Kobe, I'd get a taxi, and I'd go to the hotel and then the dojo. So anyway, so I arrive at Shin Kobe, which is the Shinkansen station at Kobe, and I get out and I jump in this taxi. Now, with the Japanese taxis, and I mean, you've been to Japan, so you know, you get to the taxi rank and the door's open. You get in, you're not allowed to touch the door. They close the door automatically and off you go. And the taxi drivers, the seats are all beautifully pristine with white covers, and the drivers have got white gloves. And so my taxi driver was driving. And but the taxi drivers are very good drivers in Japan. All of a sudden, this taxi swerves across 3 lanes because the road from Shin-Kobe into Kobe City is a very big road. He swerves, and I think, what is going on with this guy? And he turns around and he says, "Mitchell Sensei." And I looked at him. I said, "Omi Sensei, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm driving a taxi, da-di-da-di-da." So anyway, and he's so excited to see me. I was excited to see him. I hadn't seen him for 20 years. And he said to me, "What grade are you now?" I said, "Oh, I'm a 7th Dan." I think I was a 7th Dan at that time. "Oh," he said, "I'll have to call you Sensei." I said, "Why? What grade are you, Sensei?" He said, "Oh, I'm still a 4th Dan." And he said to me, he said, "No, I must call you." I said, No. You will always be my senpai. I'm a 7th Dan because you were a good senpai. And that relationship between senpai and kohai is very, very important. So you can be a senpai for some, you can be sensei for others, but he was kohai to Yamada, Kawata, Tani. Do you understand? So that dynamic of being all 3 actually helps you develop. And this is why we say people who are teaching, their karate becomes much finer because of their teaching, as long as they accept the responsibility. If they accept the responsibility of being kohei, their spirit becomes much stronger because they're demanding spirit from others. And that's also how you learn to become sensei. Because to be a good senpai, you're not a sheepdog. You are encouraging people to follow what it is you're doing by example.
Sensei Paul, in your last answer, you mentioned fast forwarding. That time of the interview went so quick. I think we covered a lot of questions. I've got one last one, just to round things up, or maybe open the next interview session, we'll see. But considering in general terms, what would you see karate being developing within the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years into?
I think that's a very difficult question, but I think it's a very important question. And it depends on whether you are a sensei, or whether you are a dojo owner, or are you a dojo renter, or are you a dojo, it depends on what you're. I think there's going to be huge changes in the next very short period. We talked about earlier how the pace of change is changing. I also mentioned earlier, here's a big promotion, writing the book, okay? Ink in the Wind, it's called. And we could talk about why it's called Ink in the Wind, if you like, just very briefly, but we won't do that right this moment. But I employed a woman, Mika, who is an artist in sumie. Sumie is the Japanese art form of line drawing that you see drawn with ink on paper and so on. And she's really, really, really skillful. But she said to me, there are two ways that we can do this. I can draw you the 24 art pieces that you want. So you sit with me, you tell me what you want, I will draw it, and that's fine. And that will cost you $1 million. No, it wasn't $1 million, but it was expensive. She said, but what we could do is I could draw the important pieces and we can get AI to fill in the balance. So I said, oh, really, I really want this to be really, she said, just go with me. If you don't like it, I can always draw it. Fine. So she started doing this stuff and I was amazed. I was amazed. Instead of it taking a week to do each piece, she was taking a couple of hours and it was finished. And when you see this stuff, when you see it in my book, and I know that you're going to have a copy of my book because I'm going to give you one. You're not even going to have to buy it. But by the way, that's not going to be the case with every book. But when you see these pieces, I think that you're going to enjoy them, because this book of haiku is not haiku like you get where they're talking about spring and flowers. And this is all about martial tactics, strategy. There's haiku about gono-sen, sen-no-sen, sen-sen-no-sen, shuhari, mei-ai, mushin, all of these things that it explains it, it underpins it, and there is a woven thread through it of the story of the 47 Ronin. And all of it is hand-drawn, beautifully hand-drawn sumie, or at least half-drawn. Okay. And she said to me, what is your favorite pose? If you want to look fantastic, what is your favorite pose? And I said to Martin, if he wants to film me, I should really be sitting where you sit, because my left side is my best side. And we all have a best side. Or here I am exposing my not so good side to you at this moment in time. But there is a look that I have. And some of you have experienced it where I'm not happy and I look at you and it's that look that says, maybe we need to change the subject just for a moment. That's my favorite look. So she said, well, do it. So this was all on Zoom, or well, it wasn't Zoom, but it was a platform that they have. And they advertise, their main business is an advertising agency. But the guy that's working with me used to be a black belt with our association, a very, very talented advertising man. And he's got a very successful advertising company. And he helped me with, he's been helping me with this project using his team. So anyway, so I struck the pose, you see, and she took a photograph of the pose. And then while we were talking, she drew me in this pose. And I'm telling you now, it's me. It's the eyes, it's the look, it's the posture. It's absolutely spot on. So when you ask me about the future, I envisage a future where the teaching of karate, look, there are things that we do that can't be taught by AI. There are things that we teach that can't be done in any way except the relationship between sensei and student. Okay, let's just get that clear right up front. But there are aspects of what we do. Sport karate, for instance, I think that the days of sports karate coaches per se is very close to being at an end. And that's not going to be a popular subject. But if you deny change change will swallow you up. There is nothing that that AI cannot be programmed to do, as well as something as repetitious as drills for sport kumite. Okay, so, and by the way, that's karate. There are elements where AI can actually create an environment that is conducive to learning. But what I'm hoping is that that will give me more time to work on and develop the aspects that cannot be taught. So I'm not going to deny it. I'm going to embrace that possibility, but I'm going to use the time that I save productively in other areas. And I suspect that I'm going to produce increasingly better students because of it.
Thank you very much for today. Your a lot of answers and prescriptions sort of leave so much room for another interview, which will be probably followed by another interview. But for today, thank you very much, Sensei Paul, for sitting here and talking to us.